Yeah, we are live now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Karsha.
Yeah.
So good evening, day, or whatever time of the day you have right now, everyone. This is another event in the series of Product People events. We are happening every week on Tuesdays, 6:30 Berlin time, and adjust to your local time zone. This event will be streamed and recorded, and this recorded will be on YouTube. Also, since we are not going to have a presentation today, it means everyone who is with camera will be visible on the recording. So if you don't want to be visible, please close your camera. But otherwise, we're always very happy to see your faces. It makes the event feel more lively. Who is Product People? Product People is a product management consultancy. We are headquartered in Berlin, but our employees are actually spread throughout several countries. We do hands-on and all the unglamorous work of product manager, product owner at the interim basis, usually between 2 to 12 months. We can do many things, including some pretty decks, but we actually prefer to deliver outcomes. We work with digital teams and help them make the impact. We are a fully distributed team, as I already mentioned. On the side, we also run a product community. It's currently over 5,000 members, and this is where these events are happening. So thank you very much for being part of our community, for coming today. These are some of the clients we worked with and are currently working. If you think we're missing someone important here and you want to recommend us to another company, please do so. We are now recruiting more people and are open for new projects. And we do have a referral bonus. So if you successfully refer us to some cool company, you'd also be rewarded. And in terms of hiring, we actually have a couple positions open right now. You can find them on productpeople.join.com. Specifically, we are looking for product managers on different levels to help us do this hands-on work that I just talked about. And today, we are here to talk about product analytics. We have a pretty special session today because we will not have a lecture, not have a talk, but rather start straight away with the second part. That's usually the second part of our event, with the questions. We are very lucky to have Matteo from HelloFresh today, who is very experienced and knowledgeable in the topic, because he's director of product analytics there, and I'm sure he can share many great insights. So I invite you to start writing your questions in the chat already now. Matteo will do a short intro about himself, and then we're basically open for the questions. We are not crazy many people right now, at least yet, so I will also invite you to ask questions with your voice, but you can also write them in the chat already. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please write questions in the chat, and I will read them in the session. With this, Matteo, welcome on the stage.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you for the invite. It's really great to meet you all. So about myself, I have roughly 10-year experience in the digital product and in product management. Right now, I'm leading the product analytics team of HelloFresh in Berlin. Before that, I was working in London for a company called Arcadia, and before that, a company called lastminute.com, and before I was working for a company called Marsh and McLennan. So about me, just before we deep dive into product analytics, I am a great runner, fan, and also, let's say, an amateur photographer, probably. So I like to take pictures when I go into my travel. So before we jump into product analytics, I can just mention something about HelloFresh, because you might not be familiar with the company. Also, there's a lot of people maybe joining from a different part of the world. HelloFresh is the world meal kit leading provider. And we always say that we are in a mission to change the way people eat forever. Essentially, the core business model of HelloFresh is to prepare fresh ingredients needed for a meal, and then pack all of them and ship directly and deliver directly to the customer, who then must cook themselves using carts and of course enjoying the activity of cooking, which is what we like. So there's a lot of value in this activity of cooking that we try to promote, obviously. So I thought that not to give, when Victoria and Mirella asked me to have a short speech about product analytics, I thought not to give one of this corporate presentation when I give the pillars about what is product analytics, but it's more like something informal, so that we can have just a quick chat or like more an informal chat, and I can maybe answer to your curiosity. But what is product analytics? So obviously in different company, product analytics can mean different things, and depends also on the maturity of the organization. But we tend to say that product analytics can group 4 main pillars. One is everything which is related to measurement, governance of the events. So when you think about Google Analytics, Google BigQuery, or even Adobe Analytics, everything which is related to the measuring an action or measuring an event that the customer do. The second pillar, customer insight, user behavioral question from product management. So one of the goals is generally to answer to anything which is related to data from product. The goal, of course, and the mission of product analytics is, of course, to try to help the product manager and in general to support the product development life cycle. When the organization is a little bit more advanced, also product analytics is working a lot with data science, so it's working to develop also modeling, and so also to develop, let's say, real data product that then are injected directly into the product. Third pillar, experimentation. So I'm a big fan of experimentation. I can talk hours about it. So if you have any curiosity from the start, from prioritizing business case, how product analytics is helping product manager in this, or how to set up the correct audience of an experiment, or how to select the proper sample size, of what kind of process do you put in place into a company, how do you foster a culture of experimentation. What is the difference between Bayesian or Frequentist, and what's in it for me, for a product manager? Most important, how do I interpret the result? How do I communicate? How do I document? One thing that we are kind of obsessed, and I will tell a little bit, is documentation. So documentation is one of the most important parts that product analytics produce. And so also one fundamental part of experimentation is also to properly document an experiment, so that if a product manager leaves, that kind of knowledge stays within the company, and also can be easily accessible from many other product managers. So that experiment, it doesn't belong to one specific product manager, but belongs to the overall organization. But it's also a matter of how do you document, how do you archive that experiment, how do you make it accessible in terms of communication. Last pillar, and then I'm gonna shut up for now to hear your question. Everything which is related to more BI solution. So when you think about Tableau, Data Studio, but more in general, reporting, even tooling, anything which will help a product manager to get insight or data, not going through an analyst. I can get a tool, I can get a report that can give me the answer directly without going directly to a product, to an analyst, waiting for his answer or her answer, and then which could be a bottleneck, of course, because we have a limited amount of product analysts, while a report or a tool can sometimes do the job. So Victoria, I will stop here if it's okay, then maybe I can add more.
Yeah, I think it's good. Thank you very much for the intro. I already see questions start to come up, but I will start with a question that I wanted to ask, because I think it's also relevant for other people. Imagine that you're a PM who is new to the company, new to the product, so you just came. What would be the first steps that you would recommend to do in this case to in terms of analytics, like who to ask, what kind of questions to ask, what to pay the most attention to, and make sure that exists or that should be established?
So to help me to answer to your question, of course, I need to talk a little bit about setup on how product management and product analytics are organized within the company. One very important topic is related to the last mile analytics. So how analytics is actually embedded and how much closely they work with product management. So if they work really, really closely, it basically means that they have weekly meeting, that they talk every day, they consult every day, they have a very good relationship, and so that last mile is actually achieved. But sometimes you might have organization where analytics or data science or data in general is completely silos. So you have like this organization where the data is like that team which we don't talk to them because they are doing those rocket science things. We don't even understand that. And that is wrong, of course, because analytics or data science should serve and should support product management and product development. So to answer to your question, let's make an hypothesis where we are in the first scenario where actually there is a lot of good collaboration between product analytics and product management. The first thing which I would do in an onboarding session is to have a meeting with an analyst and start to go through some of those pillars which I was mentioning. So what is where will I get the source of truth? What is the documentation? Where I can see all of the experiments that have been run in my domain? Where I can see all of the dashboard which have been published on that particular domain? Where can I see all of the insight or the customer insight question that have been already asked and maybe have been documented in a proper way related to my domain? And so when you have that kind of approach, if you have a good analytics and it's structured it in the proper way, there'll probably be a Confluence page where you can find by domain those kind of topic. And then the analyst can actually take you through it. So you can say, we ran this experiment, it did not work. We have generally this problem. We have this dashboard, the way to read this KPI is in this and this. But I will definitely recommend for the first, let's say, month of onboarding to have a weekly one-to-one session where you go through this type of documentation.
Cool. Thanks. That's a very good tip, I think. Let me check some questions from YouTube. What is the difference between Bayesian and Frequentist? How should I read? Approaches? And how do you explain it to management? There are two questions, basically.
It's a good question, and generally there are two different school of thoughts. So there is an infinite debate online, let's say around, not online, but let's say in academic, let's say environment around which one we should pick, or let's say what work best in certain scenario. How do I explain that? Generally, with the frequentist approach, if you think about the standard setup of an experiment, you have a control and you have a variation. In the frequentist approach, you have a null hypothesis. So please bear with me for 2 minutes. Maybe I will use some terms, but I will translate them in English very, very, very quickly. So I don't want to, let's say, drag the audience into a statistic conversation, which will step you away.
Yeah, show us an example where if we were your management, how would you explain this to us?
Exactly. So with the frequentist approach, when we came in, product analyst was trying to explain to a product manager, this p-value, it's actually 0.67, but it's actually not significant. Today the p-value is, with this experiment, the p-value is 0.87, and the product manager was thinking, but now we are closer to 0.90. So that basically means it's more significant than before, which is not, because with the frequentist, you are trying just to validate your null hypothesis. So that our mind, the way I interpret, is that it works with probability. And probability is much more closer to the Bayesian approach, where in the end, as a result of an experiment, you get the probability that something is happening or not happening, and then you get the delta. So a typical answer from an experiment where we are analyzing in a Bayesian term, it will be, you have 75% of probability that the variation will have 2% uplift. Now, that 70% of probability can be understood by everyone, because you can understand 70, but everyone can, even if you don't have statistic base, you can kind of figure it out in your mind, or having a clear idea on what 70% means. And that's kind of critical, because that 70% contains already an insight. As a product manager, you basically take risk. You can say, I want to roll out anyway this experiment, or I don't want to take this risk because it actually might be not correct. We want to reach 90% of probability instead to roll out this. But still, this information, when it comes to Bayesian, will give you an insight that you can transform into an action or not. When we were working in Bayesian, at least in HelloFresh 4 years ago, we did not have this information. Sometimes we could not translate the next step, the next action. So what do I do then? How do I iterate? While switching to Bayesian allow us actually to switch to probability, which are more easily understandable by product manager. So I try to give a simple answer for a complex topic. I hope I managed somehow, but I'm happy to take follow-up questions.
But is the approach different in the way you set up experiments, or it's more about how you interpret the results and how you calculate the results?
Both, because for frequentist approach, you also need the sample size, because you're actually saying, I need this sample which needs to be tested, and the sample needs to be actually predefined. With Bayesian, the sample size works in a bit of a different way, but the biggest difference is more how do you interpret the result. That's the main difference.
I see. Okay, thanks. Yeah, whoever asked this question on YouTube, you're welcome to write follow-up questions, and we will try to take them in. Meanwhile, I see the question from Gabriel. How do you see the role of product operations in analytics?
Product operation in analytics. Product operation is a little bit wide. So if Gabriel is in here, maybe I can ask to clarify the question. Otherwise, I will give a very generic answer, which won't be maybe on the point. I don't know if Gabriel is here.
Yeah, Gabriel.
Hi, I'm here. So I'm not in product operations. I'm more general product manager role, but I'm interested in product operations. And when we dig deep in that role, we see that product analytics is a pillar function of the product ops. So in a company that has both product analytics people and product operations people, and how you see they interacting and working together in order to get the most of that work. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel, for the question. So I think in general that every kind of decision making should be as much as data driven as possible. So even inside in let's say environment where I would say analytics is less developed in certain area, and these are environments which are sometimes less digital oriented. An operation environment or operation, let's say, structure are sometimes let's call it them a bit more old school, or like are a bit more traditional. Sometimes analytics is very different, but the experience that we have, for instance, in HelloFresh is that we are bringing a lot of analytics into site. One is in all of the supply chain management. And on the other side, we also bring in a lot of analytics inside the internal process and in the internal operation. How? We basically started to bring the same methodology which we use for our customer in terms of analyzing the funnel of what we do, analyzing their event, and try to started to get insight also with our internal let's say with our internal process, so we can see how many people, how many internal users have read their insight, have done that action, and so we then try to take a better decision making for that. So in general, you know, I'm a little bit biased, of course, because Gabriel, because I think that the role of analytics is key for any type of decision making. Should be always at the center of any process.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Thanks. Let's take one short question from YouTube now. Who is data product manager? Is it a blend between product manager and product analytics, or what do you think?
It's I would say a new role, which I can see it's a bit trendy right now. And HelloFresh is starting to develop this, but I can see that this role is coming up also in other sister company of HelloFresh. When I say sister company, more like a company which have the same size of HelloFresh and they kind of operate within the tech area. And I can see that this role is coming up more and more. Why? Because data is always more a product. We want to use data for not just driving customer insight, the user behavior question, but also to drive actually action and to have the product that face our customer directly. So in order to do that, if you treat data as a product, you need the product manager. But who is the data product manager, which is managing data product? It's not properly a standard product manager. Of course, needs to have a background probably more technical, more data, let's say, oriented. So it needs to have some expertise when it comes to all of this with this tooling or this kind of environment that I was mentioning before. But in total honesty, I can see that this type of figure is not fully defined yet. So while product manager, I think it's a figure that is quite established nowadays. You know? So it's a role which you probably can tell me a little bit more, but it's been quite established since at least 10, 15 years. While data product manager, I think it's a bit of a new role which is coming up right now. So still, even within HelloFresh or even between company and another one, you might have different responsibility, or it's still not fully defined yet.
Makes sense. Thanks. The question from Peter: when it comes to scaling the analytics team, would you rather recommend A, one central team or generalist, or having B, an organizational structure where some of the analysts act as satellites in the product teams, being a specialist in their respective product?
Good question. It depends on where you are in your journey and how big is the company. Obviously, if you have, if the company is very small, and I will give also numbers so that I cannot be generic. So let's say that your company is between 200 to 500 total employee. I'm making very rough number, very rough estimate. You have probably figure out 2 tribe and 6 squad. I don't know, making something really up. And in that case, your product analytics team or the people that deal with report and data, sometimes they are not even separate. Sometimes business intelligence analytics are still those two things which gets sometimes misunderstood with business intelligence analytics, which are 2 different figures. But in that case, it does not make any sense to me to embed completely those analysts or 1 or 2 analysts within the product manager without the function, because they will simply get lost. And one of the things that which I always say is that product managers are always more commercial driven oriented owner. They want to drive their product. They are biased by their hypothesis. They want to drive their result. And so they should not manage product analysts. They should not manage data, because data should be something that is completely unbiased. And so as a product analyst, when I give an answer to a product manager, it should be the most accurate answer, or the most complete answer, which I think is the right one. And of course, there shouldn't be no line in terms, no management there, no their reporting line between data and product manager. So I would set it up definitely a central organization to answer to the question. But then one thing which is really important, coming back to what I was mentioning before, you have a central organization, but then the last mile analytics. You have to be extremely embedded and extremely close to the product manager. How do you do that? Communication. So weekly meeting, high visibility on the backlog, obsession for documentation, and the feeling of approachability, the feeling of being there for question, the feeling of not being a separate central organization. So it's a bit of an hybrid, but definitely it's important to have a central strong team, which at the beginning. When the organization is really big, so we are talking about 10,000, 15,000 people, then is where those groups can be. You have a team of more than 30 people, 35 analysts, data science, product manager. You can start to think to break down those teams and embed it into those organizations. But at that point, the size of the tribe, which are not tribe anymore, are micro environment, are so big that allow you to have a micro product analytics team embedded in each of those functions.
Well, thank you so much for a very detailed answer. I hope, Peter, it was helpful. Give us some feedback if you can. He says, thanks for the answer. Cool. Question from YouTube. Could you walk us through end-to-end example from ideation to experimentation? So maybe an example how experiments should be run in the best way. I know probably you say that it's not that the product manager comes to you with the like very specific request, but first discuss it probably with analysts.
So we came out actually with an acronym which I love it, which is called CODLAR, which is concept, design, analysis, and result. Essentially to explain this process, which goes from the ideation of the experiment to actually to the final analysis and result of it. The first part is the critical one, because actually when you have ideas, where are those ideas generated? They could be generated from everything, from previous experiment, from intuition, from different parts of the company, for research, from other function, and so on, from the feedback of the customer that you received. One part which is really critical is to have all of your idea in the backlog, and then always try to benchmark those ideas between themselves. So if you have, let's say, 10 ideas, the question is, you have a limited amount of engineer, what should go first? And how to make this decision it's very important. No? It's kind of critical. That is the phase where you shouldn't just trust your gut feeling, but actually you should give a number to every single idea, and that number should be comparable between each other. So if your North Star metric is revenue, maybe in a simple example, then you should be able to compare those ideas one another. Once you pick the top, and this is where, of course, the analysts come into place, because they can help you most of the time to give a value to the number. What is the audience that we're talking about? What is the uplift that we might generate with this hypothesis? What is the fork that we're talking about? So once you pick your top idea, then is when you have to select your audience, and you're kind of setting up the experiment. So how many days, how many cohorts, which audience should we target? Should we target only this portion of customer, or should we target this other portion of customer? So you kind of slicing and dicing your audience, depending, of course, on how complex is the company and what is your possibility. One thing that we do in HelloFresh is in this phase, we pick also between server-side experiment and client-side experiment. Generally, client-side experiment are the one which you can build much faster, but then they might suffer from performance issue because, of course, client-side is something that you generate from the browser level. While server-side is much more accurate, but they require also much deeper development. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You need to make the call depending on the type of experiment. And even there, an analyst can help a product manager to make that kind of decision. Also, not all of the company have server-side experimentation. And so some companies use only tools like Google Optimize or Dynamic Yield or Optimizely Web. There's tons of tools around, so you can use those tools, or there are some good server side, or you can build your server side inside the company. Analysis and result. This is the phase where actually the analyst, depending, it helps you to analyze the result. And works with the product manager to kind of understand what's going on. Most of the time, the result is never so clear. But one thing is super important, that you have one only primary metric. And this needs to be established, of course, at the beginning. No? Whatever experiment is, you should never have 3 primary metrics. What is your primary metric? Is the one that will declare the winner or not the winner of the experiment. So if you have more than one primary metric, it's always a trouble, because if one is positive, one is negative, then you are not able to assess wherever is the winner. So choose your primary metric at the beginning and have a bunch of secondary metrics to explain why the primary metric is actually positive or actually negative. Last but not least, then it's about iteration. No? So it's about this documentation that I was making, and it's about learning. So you learn, you understand what's going on, and then you work with the analyst maybe to deep dive and to understand a bit more about what happened, why it didn't work out, because there's always something to learn. I think I read some blog, so don't quote me on that, but I think Optimize was reporting that 7-8 experiments out of 10 actually fail. No? And this is some percentage of which we see in general in all of the companies. So most of the experiments do not move the primary metric, but there's a lot you can learn out of it. From the secondary metric, you can learn why did it move. Maybe for a certain segment of the audience, it moves something, so you can understand. It is not always a quick win. Actually, it's the other way around. It's never a quick win.
Thanks. Thank you for leading us through. And I think there is a question connected to the initial part. You said that some ideas might come from the data, and the question is how to find users' pain points in product using product analytics. Maybe some examples you could give of what to look out for.
Depends on the company itself. It depends on the, let's say, on the universe of tool that you have. Very important to listen to your customer as much as possible, to have a very, very close connection to the feedback of your customer. Wherever you have something if it's a digital product, maybe you have something on the page for the customer to give feedback. It's important that kind of stream of feedback, it goes directly to the product manager. How? Obviously, you can't read every comment one by one. So there's a lot of company that help you actually to group this comment and to clusterize in an intelligent way. Also, product analytics in general is a good way to clusterize those comments and analyze. One example of HelloFresh is, let's say, we have also survey when the customer cancel our subscription, when they decide to pause our subscription. In that case, of course, they sometimes leave reason. They leave reason why they want to cancel their subscription. So what we try to do, we try to understand and clusterize those comments so that then we can actually action it. So feedback is really important. And generally try to use as much as possible all of the tool that that helps you, that your company has. Like, I can think about Hotjar. It's a very interesting tool. I think about Google Analytics, of course, Adobe Analytics. All of those tools are key for product manager to understand the life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I hope it was helpful. Let us know, Jaime, if you want any more. And let me check. I think we have something on YouTube as well. If you have a product analytics platform such as Pendo or Amplitude, what would be the product analytics role and their relationship with PM?
So, well, Amplitude, and I saw just demo, so I never worked with that directly. Well, that's basically doing some of the job of a product analyst. The way I see it, of course, is that you already have those tools like Amplitude, Google Analytics, Hotjar, you have tons around. But the role of a product analyst is to help the product manager to understand the why and then to dig more. So you have those funnel, you have those reports, but then also, what's the next question? What's in it for me? So the product manager is always more and more a data-driven person, can understand, can go into this tool nowadays, always more. And actually, there's always more and more the expectation that the product manager comes in and is already hyper skilled in those tools, can actually pull data by herself or by himself. But the role of product analytics then comes in terms of saying, I help you to understand why something is happening like this. And so there's always more sophisticated technique which cannot be maybe automated through those tools. So let's say, can we analyze, we were making the example of comment before, can we analyze those comments and maybe we can clusterize through k-means, which is an algorithm which we use to clusterize the comments, and then trying to have personas and then try to action those personas maybe with an experiment. So this is something you can do with Amplitude. And that role of deep dive or thinking on top of the report is always more and more the role of product analytics. Mm-hmm.
So help to understand deeper the insights, like some initial insights from these tools. And also maybe plan experiments still requires good knowledge of the topic to plan good experiments. Okay, let's go to the question of Sadie. Good analytics relies on good data. At HelloFresh, what is the role of the product analytics team in collecting and modeling data for analytics? Also, Sadie is here in the call in case you want to ask any clarifications.
Yeah, so, well, Google Analytics and generally also Adobe Analytics. But let's talk about Google Analytics because it's very popular. It's always more and more not just a script that you plug into the website. That is for a very small organization. When you have one website, maybe, I don't know, running with WordPress or running which we have one single fragment, and you take the script and it's running over there, and that returns you some basic analytics. When the organization grows, of course, you have multiple fragments, and those fragments, of course, they don't have always the same kind of source. So to give you an example, you can just add the script to one repo and then expect that the script is propagated through all of the other fragments. Essentially means that the implementation of Google Analytics is always more and more complex. So that, of course, complexity brings a problem in terms of reliability, in terms of measurement, and in terms of making sure that those measurements are actually correct. So the role of product analytics in that sense is to make sure that when the organization grows and the technology increases or is more complicated, is to make sure that actually Google Analytics is tracking the right thing. There are tons of examples when I think about, I don't know, is the UTM parameter working between this page or this other one when it's one single page application? Maybe it's not. What happened when a customer receives an error is reloading the page, maybe the cookie is refreshing, and maybe Google Analytics is counting one more user. So those are all measurement problems, which are, of course, taken into investigation by product analytics to help the measurement to be correct. Where is the implementation generally for large-scale organization? It doesn't fit within one single team because it would be impossible to manage everything. But actually, the ownership of the event is stay with each single team of the organization, which have to implement Google Analytics event. But then, for instance, in HelloFresh, we have one central team, the digital tracking team, which actually take care about an harmony among the tracking implementation among all of these different tribes and squads.
Secchi, does this answer your question, or do you want to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, it answers it for sure. I mean, the reason I asked it is because I've experienced a lot of pain points in the past where we know something is going wrong in the tracking, but it's hard to find the owner of that event. And sometimes that can be like, it can be a long pipeline of ownership, right? You have the data engine, you first maybe go to the data engineers and they're like, well, I don't know, I'm just transforming the data. I don't know where it comes from. And then you go to the people who've implemented the event and they say, well, I just did what someone told me to do. So I find it can cause a lot of pain if you don't have like strong ownership of the events. And I wonder if you have any suggestions or advice for how to create that ownership.
Yes, I feel your pain. Generally, I think that the suggestion is this, that the event or data is just one piece of the things that should be taken as the ownership by a product manager. Every product manager, every product owner, let's talk in this way, should have an area of ownership. That area of ownership is not just the UI element, or let's say the experiment, is everything which is within the area, which is the event, the data, the pipeline, everything which is downstream. So the more the organization involved, the more try to assign ownership. And assign ownership is the most beautiful things to do, because ownership means accountability. It means taking care about something. It means that the situation that you are describing, they don't happen less and less frequently. Also, let me say, if you are the product owner of, let's say, the funnel and the conversion, I don't know, the conversion, and your event is called sales event, and that event is not working and so on, you as a product owner want to make sure that you prioritize those events, because that event, if it's not firing, you cannot track your own metric and you cannot measure by your experiment of what you are doing. So it's your kind of willing to say that event needs to fire, that event needs to be prioritized among the squad, and so you take the ownership of it. But in the end, it's about breaking down the ownership as much as possible and find those areas which are orphan, which they're always there, and then try to assign to other people and bring it up the attention into that.
Yeah, it feels like you thought about this a lot. That comes from experience. Thanks. I think we take one last question. And Utkarsh, maybe you read, or not read, but say it out loud, your question.
Yeah, sure. So my question was like, different companies have different approach to product analytics, or they may be using even different tools like Google Analytics, Mixpanel or such. So what are the topics or things that you think a PM should know around product analytics, so they don't have to always reach out to analysts if they want to get some data?
What are the tools that you would start with? It depends. It depends on the maturity of the organization. It depends on the set of tools that you have at your disposal. But I always say, and it depends, of course, on the type of organization, if it's a digital company or if it's not a digital company. But if we are talking about digital company, and if you're talking about something that can be it's on a web, it's an application, then most of the time Google Analytics, it's a good start. Because even in any internal tools, it's a very good tool. I recommend to everyone to follow the kind of course, also to get more experience on how to use those reports, and then try as much as possible to get familiar with the reporting system, wherever it's Tableau or sometimes it's Google Data Studio, which is free. So some smaller company, they are based more on that. But those are the key that I will start when it comes to tooling. As mentioning before, the most important thing which product analytics is producing is actually documentation, is insight, is learning. So the tool in reality is Confluence. I don't know what every organization use, but most of the time is Jira and Confluence, and that you should be very familiar with, and trying to navigate through Confluence, understanding how to pull information out of Confluence, how to search properly in Confluence. I think it's super important.
That seems like ideal situation when the results are actually recorded well in the reports that you can understand without like deep knowledge of data, which is not always the case, but I think we can all aspire for that. Well, thank you so much, Matteo. That was very insightful. Thank you all for the questions. What will happen now? We will end the live stream, but we invite everyone who wants to stay for another 10-15 minutes to do some, oh my God, I'm already tired surprisingly, I wasn't talking that much, to do some networking. If you're watching us on YouTube, there will be a link now in the chat that you can also join us on Zoom and network. I will ask Utkarsh to set up the breakout rooms, but before that, quick slide to close the meeting of today. So thank you all very much for joining. Please come to our next event in next Tuesday and the Tuesday after, and so on. Check our event schedule on meetup.com. Join our chat on Telegram, Get Product People, if you want to continue discussion or you have some questions. We have their main interesting topics coming up and people sharing their experience. And if you want to support our event because you liked what happened today, please support us on Patreon. This helps us to pay for the tools that we need to run this event. With this, thank you all very much. See you next time on our next live event, and join us in Zoom now if you want to continue communication.
Yeah, I'll just